The cold didn't kill you all at once on Hill 7. It killed you in inches. It crept through your gloves first, numbing the fingertips until you couldn't feel the trigger anymore. Then it worked up through your boots, through the thermal socks, through the wool liners, until your toes felt like frozen stones rattling inside your boots. Then it found your core, and that's when men started making bad decisions. Sergeant First Class Derek Harmon knew all of this. 15 years in uniform, 3 combat deployments, and he'd never, not once, felt as certain of death as he did right now, pressed against a snow-covered rock barricade with 11 other soldiers, while enemy machine gun fire chewed the ridge above their heads. Negative 20 degrees Celsius. Wind gusting north-northeast at 14 knots, sometimes spiking to 22. Visibility maybe 200 meters through the driving snow before everything dissolved into white. And somewhere out there, 3 machine gun nests held the eastern high ground, like a fist around their throats. Harmon presses back against the barricade and did the math one more time. 300 meters of open ground to the tree line. The MGs were cycling. He'd timed them every 20 minutes. Crews rotating to prevent frostbite. That gave them maybe a 90-second transition window when the guns might hesitate. 90 seconds. 300 meters. Carrying wounded. The math didn't work. Sergeant. Private First Class Cole's voice was thin, reedy with pain. The shrapnel had caught him in the hip 40 minutes ago, right before the RPG took out their radio. The field dressing was already soaked through, dark against the white snow packed around it. Sergeant, I can't feel my legs. That's the cold, Coles. Just the cold. Stay with me. It wasn't just the cold. Harmon knew it. Coles knew it. Everyone huddled behind that barricade knew it. The radio was dead. Not just quiet. Dead. The antenna housing had been shot clean off, probably by the same sniper who'd put 2 rounds into Corporal Mitchell's pack. The backup radio was buried somewhere under 4 feet of snow, kicked loose during initial contact. They'd looked. They'd dug. They'd found nothing but frozen earth and more snow, which meant no QRF, no air support, no extraction, no cavalry riding over the hill. Just 12 soldiers, 1 wounded, 1 dying by degrees, an enemy force had all day to wait them out. Anyone got eyes on that mortar team? Harmon called. Negative. Specialist Whitfield was pressed against the eastern edge of the barricade, his M4 tucked against his shoulder like a security blanket. Last round impacted, maybe 50 meters north. They're bracketing us, Sergeant. Another adjustment or 2 and they'll... The rest of his sentence was swallowed by the crump of another mortar round. It landed 40 meters away, close enough to shower them with frozen debris. 40 meters, someone muttered. Jesus Christ. Harmon's jaw tightened. He looked down the line of soldiers, his responsibility, and saw exactly what he expected to see. Fear, exhaustion, the beginning edges of despair. And then his eyes landed on her. Private First Class Calloway sat at the far edge of the barricade, knees pulled to her chest, her standard issue pack clutched against her body. She wasn't looking at the ridge. She wasn't looking at the enemy positions. She was staring at nothing, her face blank beneath the frost that clung to her balaclava. Medical and communications specialist. That's what her transfer papers said. Attached to his unit 9 days ago with minimal explanation and 0 combat experience listed. Harmon had barely spoken to her. None of them had. She was background noise. A body filling a slot. Specialist Kowalski, loud, crude, and terrified in equal measure, summed up what half the platoon was thinking when he spat into the snow and said, "Any chance our support specialists over there knows how to call in a goddamn airstrike?" A few nervous laughs. Calloway didn't react. Didn't think so. Kowalski shook his head. Why the hell did they even send us a... Enough. Harmon's voice cut through like a blade. We've got bigger problems. But even as he said it, something tugged at the edge of his attention. Something about Calloway. About the way she sat there, so perfectly still, not shaking, not panicking, just watching. If that opening hooked you, stay with me. This story only gets more intense. Subscribe now for more incredible true stories of courage under fire, and hit that notification bell. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. Now let me show you just how deep this frozen nightmare went. Harmon forced his focus back to the tactical reality. The enemy held 3 machine gun positions, Two confirmed active on the eastern slope, one suspected position to the west. Intel had been sparse going in, and now it was ancient history. All he knew for certain was what he could see, hear, and calculate. And right now, all three of those senses told him the same thing. They were going to die on this ridge. All right, listen up. Harmon's voice was steady, the kind of steady that took years to manufacture. I need options. Real options. We've got maybe an hour of daylight left, and once the sun drops, that temperature is going to fall another 10 degrees. We can't survive the night here. We can't survive crossing that open ground either, Whitfield said. Those MGs will cut us down in 8 seconds. I've done the math. Then we need to change the math. Silence. The wind howled to the gap in the rocks, carrying with it the distant sound of the enemy repositioning. Boots on frozen earth. The metallic clatter of a PCAM being repositioned on its tripod. Harmon turned his head, scanning his soldiers one more time. Whitfield, solid but realistic about their chances. Kowalski, running his mouth to keep from screaming. Coles, bleeding out by inches. Torres and Davis, young and terrified. And the others, good soldiers, all of them, reduced the spectators in their own deaths. And then there was Calloway, still motionless, still staring. No, not staring at nothing. For the first time, Harmon noticed the angle of her gaze. It wasn't vacant. It was fixed, locked onto the eastern slope with a kind of intensity that didn't belong on a support specialist's face. He almost said something, almost asked her what she was looking at, but another mortar round screamed in 35 meters this time, and the moment was lost in the scramble for cover. The thing about freezing to death was that it started to feel warm. That's what the survival training always said. Your body started shutting down, conserving heat, pulling blood away from your extremities. And somewhere in that process, the shivering stopped and a strange, deadly comfort set in. Corporal Mitchell was starting to feel warm. He sat with his back against the barricade, his pack, the one with 2 rifle rounds punched through it, serving as a makeshift pillow. The bullet that should have killed him had been stopped by a steel magazine inside. Lucky. That's what everyone said. Mitchell was lucky. He didn't feel lucky anymore. He felt tired and warm. Hey! Specialist Torres shook his shoulder. Mitchell, stay awake, man. Stay with me. Mitchell blinked slowly, like a man surfacing from deep water. Yeah, I'm good. He wasn't good. Nobody was good. Harmon watched his platoon deteriorate by degrees and felt the weight of command pressing down on his shoulders like frozen stone. 15 years, 3 deployments, commendations, medals. All of it had led to this moment, this impossible decision. Hold position and freeze to death. Attempt to cross and get cut down. Or surrender, Kowalski said. The word came out of his mouth like something rotten. We surrender. Raise a white flag. Negotiate for her. They're not taking prisoners. Whitfield's voice was flat. You saw what they did to 2nd Platoon at the outpost. This isn't that kind of fight. Then what the hell do you suggest? Because I'm not dying in this. Enough. Harmon stood, ignoring the way his knees protested. I said I want options, not panic. We're United States soldiers. We do not. We're dead men is what we are. Everyone turned to look at Kowalski. His face had gone pale beneath the frost, his eyes wide with a kind of fear that stripped away rank and training and left only the animal underneath. Look around you, Sergeant. Really look. Coles is bleeding out. Mitchell's half frozen. The radio's gone. Nobody's coming. And even if we somehow make it to that tree line, there's another 600 meters of exposed ridge before the extraction zone. He laughed, a harsh, broken sound. We're not soldiers anymore. We're just bodies that haven't stopped moving yet. The silence that followed was the worst kind, the kind that meant people were agreeing. Harmon felt it like a physical blow. The erosion of morale, the collapse of unit cohesion. He'd seen it happen to other units. He'd studied it in after-action reports. But he'd never felt it happening to his own soldiers. Not until now. Kowalski. Harmon's voice was quiet, controlled. I understand you're scared. We're all scared. But we're also still alive. And as long as we're alive, we fight. That's the job. That's the mission. What mission? There is no mission anymore. There's just survival. And we're not going to... Any of you qualified as snipers? The voice was soft, barely above a whisper, but in the frozen silence of that barricade, it cut through everything. Every head turned toward the far edge of the position. Private First Class Calloway hadn't moved. She was still sitting with her knees pulled to her chest, her pack clutched against her body. But her eyes were different now. They were focused, sharp, fixed on Harmon with an intensity that made his skin prickle beneath his layers. "What?" Kowalski spat. "What the hell did you just—" "The machine gun positions," Calloway continued, her voice calm, clinical. "Eastern slope, 2 active nests, approximately 430 to 440 meters. Western slope, 1 nest, currently inactive but manned. Crew rotation every 20 minutes. They're cycling to prevent frostbite. 4-minute transition window during changeover, but only a 90-second gap when both guns are simultaneously uncrewed." The words hung in the frozen air like smoke. Harmon stared at her. "How do you—" "The mortar team is positioned on the reverse slope, 200 meters behind the eastern nests. 3 men, 1 tube. They fired 4 rounds in the last 40 minutes, 2 ranging shots, 2 adjustments. The next round will land within 20 meters of this position." "Calloway." Harmon's voice had gone very quiet. "How do you know that?" For the first time, she turned her head and looked directly at him. Her eyes were the color of winter sky, pale, cold, and absolutely steady. "Because I've been watching them for an hour." The wind howled. Someone coughed. And in that moment, everything Sergeant First Class Derek Harmon thought he knew about the soldier sitting at the edge of his barricade collapsed like a structure built on sand. "Who the hell are you?" Whitfield whispered. Calloway didn't answer. Instead, she reached for her pack, the oversized standard-issue pack that everyone had assumed contained medical supplies and communication equipment. She began to unzip it. What emerged wasn't a medkit. It wasn't a radio component. It wasn't anything that belonged in the hands of a support specialist. It was a rifle, bolt action, long barrel, wrapped in a 4-layer insulated composite thermal wrap that had disguised its shape inside her pack. The scope mounted on top caught the gray light and held it, a Schmidt and Bender 5, 25x56, military-grade optics designed for extreme-range precision shooting. "My designation is Echo 3, Calloway said, her fingers moving over the weapon with the kind of familiarity that only came from thousands of hours of practice. "I was attached to your unit for observation and background assessment. My orders were maintain cover unless tactical conditions became." She paused, glancing at coals bleeding in the snow. Unavoidable. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Harmon's mind raced through the implications. "Echo, that designation belonged to a Tier 1 asset classification, the kind of operator who didn't officially exist on any unit roster." "You're a sniper," he said slowly. "No." Calloway's eyes met his. "I'm the sniper. 3 years earlier. Fort Benning, Georgia. 0430 hours. The rifle felt wrong in her hands. Not mechanically. Mechanically, it was perfect, a precision instrument tuned to micrometer tolerances. But it felt wrong because Staff Sergeant Marcus Owens wasn't standing behind her anymore, correcting her grip, adjusting her elbow, telling her to breathe. Marcus Owens was dead. The memory came whether Mara wanted it or not. The training exercise in the mountains of North Carolina, the live-fire scenario that was supposed to be controlled routine, the ricochet that nobody could have predicted, the way his hand had gone to his neck. Confused at first, like he'd been stung by something. The way he'd looked at her, his student, his protege, the 21-year-old private he'd spent 18 months transforming from a nervous recruit into something else entirely, with an expression that wasn't fear or pain but something like pride. "Finish it," he'd whispered, blood pooling in the snow. "Finish what I started." She had. The next 2 years were a blur of training that bordered on punishment. Long-range shooting in conditions that would have made most operators quit. Mountain warfare, Arctic survival, urban concealment. She learned to disappear in plain sight, to be the person nobody looked at twice, to carry her identity like a mask that could be removed and replaced at will. Echo 3, that was her designation now. Not a name, a function, a tool to be deployed when conventional options failed. And on Hill 7, watching 12 soldiers die by inches while the enemy consolidated their kill zone, conventional options had failed 40 minutes ago. I need you to understand something, Mara said, her fingers finishing the assembly of her rifle with practiced efficiency. I'm not here because Command thought you needed backup. I'm here because there's a high-value intelligence asset in the valley below, someone we've been tracking for 8 months. My mission was to confirm his presence and report coordinates for a precision strike. Harmon's jaw tightened. And the platoon? Collateral coverage. Protection for my approach. She met his eyes without flinching. I was never supposed to reveal myself unless extraction was compromised. Those were my orders. And now, Mara looked at the wounded soldier bleeding in the snow, at the faces of men who'd stopped believing they would survive, at the ridge where enemy machine guns waited to cut them down the moment they moved. Now my orders had become incompatible with the situation on the ground. She pulled a worn topographic sheet from inside her jacket, a field map covered in pencil annotations, marks that no one had seen her make during the long hours of waiting. She spread it on the frozen ground between them. There's a drainage cut 60 meters northeast of this position, below enemy sight lines. It connects to the tree line without crossing any exposed ground. Her finger traced a route on the map. I've been tracking their observation patterns, their focus on the direct northern approach, the 300 meters of open ground. They're not watching the drainage. Whitfield leaned forward, studying the map with new eyes. How do you know they're not watching it? Because I've spent the last hour studying their fields of fire. Their MGs are fixed on the northern kill zone. Their spotters are focused on movement in that direction. The drainage cut is dead ground, terrain they can't see from their current positions. But we still have to cross 60 meters to reach it, Harmon said. And those machine guns will be unmanned. Mara's voice was flat, certain. For exactly 90 seconds during the crew rotation, long enough to reach the drainage if we move immediately. Kowski laughed, the same harsh, broken sound from before. So we're betting our lives on 90 seconds and your word that you've somehow been watching enemy positions for an hour without any of us noticing? Mara looked at him, just looked, with those pale, winter sky eyes that seemed to see through skin and bone to whatever trembled underneath. Yes, she said, that's exactly what you're betting on. The silence stretched. Harmon studied the woman in front of him, the woman he dismissed, overlooked, written off as an administrative burden. Private First Class Mara Calloway, 24 years old, 5'6", a ghost hiding in plain sight. The machine gun nests, he said slowly. Even during a rotation gap, there'll still be personnel in position. The moment we start moving, they'll see us. They'll get the guns back up. No. Mara pulled the rifle into her shoulder, sighting down the scope toward the eastern slope. They won't, because I'm going to kill them first. The words landed like rounds impacting frozen earth. Both nests? Whitfield's voice cracked slightly. That's what, 400 meters? In this wind? In this visibility? 430 to 440 meters for the eastern position, Mara corrected. Wind north-northeast, 7 to 14 knots, gusting. I'll need to apply half-mil elevation correction and approximately 3 inches of left drift compensation. The Schmidt and Bender is already dialed to 18 power magnification. She said the way other people might describe making coffee. Simple, mechanical, just a problem to be solved. And the western nest? Harmon pressed. 18 seconds after first shot. Adjusted angle, modified wind calculation. The crew will be responding to first engagement. They'll present as targets for approximately 4 seconds before they can acquire my position. 4 seconds? More than enough. Harmon stared at her, at the rifle in her hands, at the absolute certainty in her eyes. And the command element? For the first time, something flickered across Mara's face. Not doubt, something else. Something that looked almost like anticipation. 38 seconds after the first shot, the command element is positioned on the slope above the eastern nest, partially concealed behind a snow-covered outcrop. I've been tracking his movement for 47 minutes. He repositions every 6 to 8 minutes, shifts his weight, adjusts his binoculars. In 38 seconds, he'll expose himself to my firing position. You can't possibly know that. I know exactly that. Mara's finger traced a line on her topographic map. Pattern recognition, behavioral analysis. He's cold, he's impatient, and he keeps looking toward the valley floor, which means he's waiting for something. An extraction, probably, or a status report. Either way, he's not focused on maintaining cover. He's focused on the clock. And you can hit a partially concealed target at 400 plus meters? In whiteout conditions, Mara was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of something heavy and permanent. Staff Sergeant Marcus Owens taught me to shoot. He died 3 years ago in my arms because of a ricochet that shouldn't have happened. A 1 in a million angle on a training round that found his throat. She paused. He spent his last 30 seconds making me promise to finish what he started, to be better than him, to be the shooter he always knew I could be. She looked at Harmon with those pale eyes. I've spent 3 years keeping that promise. I've made shots that aren't supposed to be possible. I've hit targets that other snipers swore couldn't be hit. I've done things with a rifle that the training manuals say are theoretical at best. Her voice dropped. Sergeant, I am telling you, when I pull this trigger, men are going to die, and then you're going to lead your soldiers to safety. The preparation took exactly 7 minutes. Mara worked in silence, her movements economical and precise. She checked the chamber, verified the ammunition, match grade, hand-loaded, optimized for extreme cold, adjusted the scope one final time, compensating for the temperature differential between the optics and the ambient air. The rest of the platoon watched her like men, watching a ritual they didn't understand. Harmon positioned himself beside her, his voice low. Walk me through the sequence one more time. 3 shots in 40 seconds. Mara didn't look up from her rifle. First shot neutralizes the Eastern machine gun operator. Second shot 18 seconds later, Western gun. Third shot 38 seconds after first, command element. Her fingers made a final adjustment to the scope. The moment the third shot hits, you move 60 meters to the drainage cut. Don't stop. Don't look back. I'll provide overwatch until you reach the tree line. And then I follow. Or I don't. Either way, you keep moving. Harmon's jaw tightened. That's not how this works. We don't leave people behind. Mara paused. For the first time since she'd revealed herself, something human flickered behind her eyes, a ghost of the woman who existed beneath the designation. Sergeant, she said quietly, I've been invisible for 9 days. I've watched your unit operate. I've seen how you treat your soldiers, the ones who are useful and the ones who aren't. I've seen the way Kowalski looks at me, the way Torres avoids me, the way you forgot I existed until 40 minutes ago. Harmon said nothing. There was nothing to say. I'm not telling you this because I'm hurt, Mara continued. I'm telling you because it means my cover worked. I was supposed to be invisible. I was supposed to be nobody. And I was... She turned her head to look at him directly. But right now I need you to see me. I need you to understand what I'm about to do. Because in 90 seconds, everything changes. Harmon nodded slowly. I see you. Good. Mara shifted her position, bringing the rifle scope to her eye. Then see this too. Private Coles has a shrapnel wound that's been bleeding for 40 minutes. His field dressing is saturated. He's going into shock. I know. He needs to move anyway. Mara's voice was flat, clinical. If you leave him here, he dies. If you carry him to the extraction zone, he might die. But might is better than will. Do you understand what I'm saying? Harmon's hands clenched. You're saying I need to force a wounded man to move when moving might kill him. I'm saying you need to give him a chance to live, which means you need to stop treating him like he's already dead. The words hit harder than Harmon expected. He looked at Coles, pale, shaking, barely conscious, and saw the truth in Mara's assessment. He'd already started writing the man off, already started calculating the mission without him. Okay, he said finally. Okay, we move as a unit. Everyone moves. Good. Mara turned her attention back to the scope. Now brief your soldiers. You have 6 minutes before the next crew rotation begins. Harmon hesitated. Calloway. Echo 3. Echo 3. He tested the designation, felt its weight. When this is over, who are you going to be? Mara was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible above the wind. I don't know anymore. The briefing took 4 minutes. Harmon kept it simple. Move on his command, stay low, reach the drainage cut, don't stop for anything. He didn't explain how they were going to survive the machine gun fire. He didn't explain where Calloway had come from or what she could do. Some things were better shown than told. Kowalski had questions. Of course he did. So we're just supposed to trust her? This random support specialist who's suddenly a sniper? This? Yes. Harmon cut him off. We're supposed to trust her. Because the alternative is dying right here, right now. And I don't know about you, specialist, but I'm not ready to die in this frozen hellhole. Kowalski opened his mouth, closed it. For once, he had nothing to say. Torres checked his weapon. Davis helped stabilize Coles, who had regained enough consciousness to understand that something was happening. Whitfield watched the ridge with new eyes, trying to see what Calloway had seen. The patterns, the rotations, the invisible mathematics of survival. And Mitchell, poor, lucky Mitchell with the bullets in his pack, closed his eyes and prayed. Not loudly, not obviously, just a whisper of moving lips and a hand pressed against his chest. 2 minutes, Mara announced. Harmon moved his position, second in the formation, behind Torres and beside Coles. His rifle was ready. His legs were frozen but functional. His heart was beating faster than he wanted to admit. 1 minute. Mara shifted her body fractionally, settling into the final shooting position. Her breathing slowed. Her pulse dropped. The world narrowed to the scope, the wind, and the targets waiting on the eastern slope. 30 seconds. The platoon tensed. Muscles coiled. Eyes locked on the path to the drainage cut. 20 seconds. The eastern machine gun fell silent. Crew rotation beginning. Mara tracked the movement through her scope, watching bodies shift, hands pull away from triggers. 10 seconds. She exhaled halfway, held it, felt her heartbeat slow to a crawl. 5 seconds. Her finger touched the trigger. 3. The wind gusted. 14 knots north-northeast. 2. She applied the correction. Half mil elevation. 3 inches left. 1. The world went quiet. The shot cracked across the frozen ridgeline, like a whip made of thunder. 437 meters. Wind north-northeast at 13 knots. Temperature negative 20 Celsius. Target. One man standing beside a PK machine gun, his hands pulling away from the weapon as he prepared for rotation. He never completed the movement. Mara felt the recoil pulse through her shoulder, controlled, expected, absorbed. The round traveled the distance in a fraction of a second, crossing the wind-torn gap between positions with mathematical precision. The target dropped. No sound, no cry, just a body folding in on itself and disappearing behind the snow-covered barricade. 1. Mara worked the bolt. Brass casing ejected into the snow, steaming. Fresh round chambered. 18 seconds. She shifted her position. Not much, just enough to acquire the western nest. The angle was different here. The wind had changed direction slightly, pushed by the terrain features between positions. She calculated the adjustment in real time, her brain processing variables faster than conscious thought. The western machine gunner was already moving. He'd heard the shot. Of course he had, and was scrambling toward his weapon, hands reaching for the grip, head turning toward the source of the sound. He was fast. Mara was faster. The second shot hit him in the upper chest, spinning him away from the gun like a marionette with cut strings. He collapsed against the barricade, twitched once, and went still. 2. Bolt worked. Brass ejected. Fresh round chambered. 20 seconds remaining. Now came the hard part. The command element was positioned on the slope above the eastern nest, partially concealed behind a snow-covered outcrop. Mara had been watching him for 47 minutes, watching his movements, his patterns, his tells. He was disciplined, but not perfect. Every 6 to 8 minutes, he shifted his weight, adjusted his binoculars, exposed himself to potential observation. She had calculated that his next movement would occur approximately 38 seconds after her first shot. She had been wrong. He moved early. The moment the second machine gunner went down, the command element reacted, not with panic, but with the cold efficiency of someone who understood what was happening. He grabbed his radio, pulled back behind the outcrop, and began issuing orders. Mara tracked him through the scope, watching the edge of the rock formation, waiting for the exposure that might never come. 15 seconds. She could hear Harmon's voice behind her, low and urgent. Move, move, move. The platoon was running. 12 soldiers, 11 mobile, 1 half carried, sprinting toward the drainage cut with everything they had left. 10 seconds. The command element was still behind cover, still invisible, still alive. Mara felt the first cold edge of doubt. She had promised 3 targets in 40 seconds. She had promised the platoon would reach safety. She had promised 5 seconds. The radio. He was using the radio, which meant he had to hold it, which meant she shifted her aim point 3 inches left, tracking the edge of the outcrop where his arm would have to extend to maintain antenna alignment. 2 seconds. A glove emerged from behind the rock. A hand. A forearm. Not enough. 1 second. Mara exhaled. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The command element leaned forward, just fractionally, just enough to verify that his transmission was being received, and his head cleared the edge of the outcrop by exactly 2 inches. 2 inches was enough. The third shot caught him in the temple. He dropped without a sound, the radio tumbling from his hand, the transmission dying in a burst of static. 42 seconds total. 2 seconds over her estimate. Not perfect, but close enough. The platoon reached the drainage cut in 67 seconds. Mara watched them go through her scope, tracking their movement, scanning for threats that might emerge from positions she hadn't identified. The enemy was reacting now. She could see movement on the slope, figures scrambling to understand what had happened, voices raised in confusion and alarm. But they were looking the wrong direction, looking toward the northern approach, toward the obvious crossing point, toward the kill zone they had prepared so carefully. They weren't looking at the drainage cut. Mara allowed herself exactly 3 seconds of satisfaction. Then she broke down her position, secured her rifle, and began her own movement toward the tree line. The snow was deep here, thigh-deep in places, with hidden drifts that could swallow a careless step. She moved with deliberate precision, following a path she had memorized during her hour of observation. Each step was calculated. Each movement was controlled. She could hear the enemy now, shouting in a language she didn't speak, their voices carrying on the wind. They knew something had happened. They knew their command structure had been decapitated in less than a minute, but they didn't know where the shots had come from. They didn't know how many shooters. They didn't know if a full assault was coming, or if this was just the beginning of something larger. Confusion was a weapon, and Mara had just loaded it. She reached the drainage cut and dropped into its protective shadow. The platoon was ahead of her. She could see their tracks in the snow, heading northeast toward the tree line. Coles was slowing them down, his weight distributed between Torres and Davis. But they were moving. That was all that mattered. The tree line emerged from the wideout like a ghost. Mara reached it 4 minutes after leaving the barricade, her lungs burning with cold air, her muscles screaming with effort. The platoon was already there, huddled among the first row of snow-covered pines, catching their breath, trying to process what had just happened. Harmon saw her first. His face was a mask of exhaustion and something else, something that looked almost like awe. 3 shots, he said quietly. 40 seconds. 42, Mara corrected. Close enough. She allowed herself a nod. Then she moved past him to assess the tactical situation. 8 minutes of daylight remaining. 600 meters of exposed ridge between their current position and the extraction zone. The helicopter would be waiting in the valley, running dark, invisible to enemy observation, but it couldn't wait forever. Extraction windows had limits. We need to move, she said. Coles needs to move too. Mara's voice was flat. His wound is stable. The field dressing is holding. If we get him to the extraction zone within the next 20 minutes, the flight medics can handle the rest. Harmon looked at the wounded private, pale, shaking, barely conscious. And if we don't, then he dies here instead of dying there. Mara met his eyes. The math doesn't change just because we don't like it. Harmon's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He couldn't. The math was the math. All right, he said. Everyone up. We're moving in 60 seconds. Same formation as before. Torres and Davis on Coles. Whitfield on point. Calloway. He paused. Echo 3. You got Overwatch. Mara nodded. She moved to the edge of the tree line, scanning the ridgeline through her scope. The enemy was still disorganized, still trying to locate the source of the shots that had killed their leadership. But they wouldn't stay confused forever. Eventually, someone would take charge. Someone would restore order. And when that happened, they would come. 47 seconds. Mara adjusted her position, settling into a comfortable Overwatch stance. The Schmidt and Bender tracked across the frozen terrain, searching for movement, for threats, for anything that might complicate the extraction. 31 seconds. Nothing. Just snow and rock and the distant shapes of enemy soldiers who hadn't yet figured out how to respond. 18 seconds. She began to breathe easier. Maybe they would make it. Maybe the confusion would hold long enough for them to reach the valley floor. Maybe. 7 seconds. The shot came from somewhere behind them. The round snapped past Mara's head close enough that she felt the displaced air against her cheek. She dropped instinctively, rolling away from her position, her rifle clutched against her chest. The second shot hit the tree where she'd been standing, spraying bark and frozen splinters across the snow. Sniper. Whitfield's voice cracked with panic. We've got a sniper in the trees. The platoon scattered, seeking cover behind trunks and rocks and anything that might stop a bullet. Coles went down hard. Torres lost his grip, couldn't hold the weight, and the wounded private hit the snow with a groan that cut through the chaos. Mara's mind was already calculating. The shots had come from the northwest, behind them, deeper in the forest, which meant the enemy had positioned a counter-sniper element during the night, probably anticipating exactly this kind of escape route. She had missed it. In her hour of observation, focus on the machine gun positions and the obvious threats, she had missed the sniper in the trees. Everyone stay down. Harmon was shouting, his voice barely audible above the wind. Stay low and don't move. But staying low wasn't going to save them. The sniper knew their position now. He had the high ground, or at least concealment, and he would pick them off one by one if they didn't move. Mara pressed herself against a tree trunk, her rifle extended toward the northwest. She scanned through the scope, searching for any sign of the shooter, muzzle flash, movement, disturbed snow. Nothing. He was good. The third shot hit the tree 3 inches from her face. She felt the impact vibrate through the wood, felt the splinters sting her cheek. Very good. Calloway. Harmon had worked his way toward her position, staying low, using the terrain for cover. Can you see him? Negative. Mara's voice was calm, but her heart was racing. He's approximately 600 to 700 meters northwest, in the tree line. I can't get a visual. Then how do we? The fourth shot hit Corporal Mitchell. The round took him in the shoulder, spinning him backward into the snow. Mitchell screamed, a raw, animal sound that echoed to the frozen forest, and then went silent as shock overwhelmed the pain. Mitchell's hit. Davis was scrambling toward the corporal, his medical training overriding his fear. I need somebody help me. Stay down. Harmon grabbed Davis by the collar, pulling him back behind cover. You go out there, you're dead. He's waiting for exactly that. But Mara wasn't listening to the shouting anymore. She was focused on something else, a pattern she started to notice in the timing of the shots. First shot, 7 seconds. Second shot, 12 seconds. Third shot, 8 seconds. Fourth shot, he was repositioning between shots, moving to new positions, acquiring new angles, making himself impossible to track. Professional protocol, the kind of discipline that only came from serious training. But repositioning took time, and time created patterns. Mara began counting. 11 seconds since the fourth shot. She scanned the northwest tree line, looking for any sign of movement. 16 seconds. Nothing. 22 seconds. Still nothing. The fifth shot hit the snow 3 feet from her position. 22 seconds. That was his cycle. Approximately 22 seconds between shots, which meant approximately 22 seconds of movement between positions. She began to map it. Shot 5 had come from a different angle than shots 3 and 4. He was moving counterclockwise, circling around the platoon's position, trying to find better angles, trying to establish a kill zone. He's moving, Mara said quietly. What? Harmon pressed closer. The sniper? He's repositioning between shots. 22-second cycle, counterclockwise movement. He's trying to flank us. Can you hit him? Not yet. Mara's eyes never left her scope, but I can predict where he'll be. She studied the terrain, the tree spacing, the elevation changes, the patches of cover that would appeal to a repositioning sniper. If he was moving counterclockwise, his next position would be approximately 40 degrees left of his current location. She shifted her aim point, waited. 22 seconds passed. No shot. 25 seconds. Still nothing. 30 seconds. The sniper had changed his pattern. He knew she was watching. He was adapting. Mara felt a cold knot form in her stomach. This wasn't a conscript with a rifle. This was a trained operator, someone who understood the game they were playing. And right now, he was winning. The wound on her arm came from the sixth shot. Mara didn't even realize she'd been hit until she felt the warmth spreading across her left bicep. The round had grazed her, not deep, but enough to draw blood, enough to compromise her shooting arm. She gritted her teeth against the pain and maintained her position. "You're hit." Harmon's voice was tight with concern. Flesh wound. "Doesn't matter." "Calloway." "I said it doesn't matter." Mara's voice was sharper than she intended. She forced herself to breathe. The shot came from approximately 670 meters northwest. His new position. He settled now, stopped moving. "How do you know?" "Because he hit me." Mara adjusted her scope, compensating for the new range. A moving shooter would have missed completely. He took the time to aim. "That means he thinks he has the advantage now." "Does he?" Mara didn't answer. Instead, she watched the wind. It had been erratic all day, gusting in unpredictable patterns, shifting direction every 30 to 90 seconds. For most snipers, that kind of wind was a nightmare. It made long-range shooting almost impossible. But Mara had been watching the wind for over an hour. She had been tracking its cycles, its patterns, its moments of relative stability. She had the math. "The wind cycles every 90 seconds, she said quietly. For approximately 4 seconds in each cycle, it drops to 7 knots or less. That's my window. 4 seconds? That's all I need." Harmon stared at her. "You're going to hit a concealed sniper at 600 plus meters in 4 seconds of stable wind while wounded?" "Yes." "How?" Mara was silent for a moment. Then she said something that Harmon would remember for the rest of his life. "Because Staff Sergeant Owens didn't die so I could miss." She settled into her position. The wound in her arm throbbed with each heartbeat, but she pushed the pain away, pushed everything away until it was only the scope, the wind, and the target somewhere in the trees. 30 seconds into the cycle, wind gusting at 18 knots. She scanned the northwest tree line, looking for the shooter's position. He was concealed, deeply concealed, but concealment was never perfect. There would be a tell, a shape that didn't belong, a shadow that moved when shadows shouldn't move. 50 seconds. Wind at 20 knots, shifting northeast. Nothing. 60 seconds. Wind beginning to drop. Still nothing. 70 seconds. Wind at 14 knots, trending downward. There, a slight disturbance in the snow beneath a cluster of pine branches. Too regular to be natural. Too smooth. Mara adjusted her aim point. 670 meters. Wind dropping through 12 knots. Elevation correction applied. Drift compensation calculated. 80 seconds. Wind at 9 knots. She inhaled, held it halfway. 85 seconds. 7 knots. Her finger tightened on the trigger. 90 seconds. 6 knots. The wind window. Mara fired. 670 meters. The round traveled the distance in 0.87 seconds, long enough for the wind to push it fractionally, long enough for gravity to pull it down from its initial trajectory, long enough for a dozen variables to conspire against the shot. But Mara had accounted for all of them. The bullet struck the snow cluster beneath the pine branches. The shape beneath it jerked once violently and then went still. For a long moment, nothing moved. The wind howled through the trees. The snow continued to fall. The frozen forest held its breath. Then a rifle tumbled out of concealed position. A Dragunov SVD military grade, designed for exactly this kind of engagement. It clattered against a tree trunk and disappeared into a drift. The sniper didn't move to retrieve it. The sniper wouldn't be moving again. "He's down," Mara said. Harmon stared at her. He had seen combat. He had seen soldiers perform under pressure. But he had never seen anything like what he had just witnessed, the calculated precision, the impossible patience, the absolute certainty of a shot that shouldn't have been possible. "How did you?" Later, Mara was already moving, her wounded arm pressed against her side. He wasn't alone. 4-man element, flanking support. They'll be approximately 200 meters south of his position. When they realize he's dead, they'll either retreat or advance. Which one? Depends on their orders. Mara paused at the edge of the tree cover, scanning south through her scope. If they're disciplined, they'll withdraw and regroup. If they're aggressive, they'll push forward to avenge him. And what do we do either way? We move. Mara lowered her rifle. The extraction zone is 600 meters northeast. We have maybe 8 minutes before more enemy forces respond. Coles and Mitchell are both wounded now. We need to go. Now. Harmon didn't argue. He couldn't. Every second they stayed in position was a second the enemy used to reorganize, to redirect, to close the trap around them. Everyone up. His voice cut through the chaos. We're moving. Same formation. Torres, Davis, get Coles and Mitchell. Everyone else, weapons ready. We're pushing through to the valley floor. The platoon moved. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't coordinated. But it was movement. 12 soldiers plus one ghost, pushing through knee-deep snow toward an extraction point that suddenly seemed impossibly far away. Mara stayed at the rear, her rifle covering their retreat. The wound in her arm was still bleeding, but she'd shoved a field dressing against it and taped it in place. Good enough. It would hold until they reached the helicopter. If they reached the helicopter, the flanking element appeared 3 minutes later. For men, exactly as Mara had predicted, moving through the trees approximately 150 meters south. They were spread out, tactical spacing, covering each other's angles, but their movement was uncertain, hesitant. They had lost their sniper. Their commander was dead on the slope above the barricade. Their machine gun teams were neutralized. The carefully planned ambush had become a disaster, and now they were operating without guidance. Mara watched them through her scope. She could take one, maybe two, before they scattered, but that would mean stopping. That would mean letting the platoon get ahead. That would mean risking another extended engagement. She made a decision. Contact south, she said quietly. 4 hostiles, 150 meters. They're moving parallel to our path. Can you engage? Harmon asked. Affirmative. But if I do, they'll pin us here. Better to let them lose direction. What do you mean? They're confused. Mara tracked the lead element through her scope. No leadership. No communication with command. They're moving because that's what they were told to do, but they don't know what they're supposed to be doing anymore. If we keep moving and stay quiet, they'll lose our trail. It was a gamble. If she was wrong, if the flanking element spotted them, if they got lucky with contact, then the extraction would become a firefight that the platoon wasn't equipped to win. But Mara trusted her assessment. She had spent 3 years learning to read human behavior through a scope, and what she saw in those 4 men wasn't aggression or determination. It was doubt. Keep moving, she said. Stay low. Stay quiet. Let them pass. The platoon obeyed. They moved through the trees like ghosts, frozen, exhausted, terrified, but silent. Even Kowalski, who had spent the last hour preparing to die, moved with precision that surprised everyone, including himself. The flanking element passed within 70 meters of their position, close enough to hear their footsteps in the snow, close enough to see the vapor of their breath. But they didn't look north. They were focused on the last known position of their sniper, trying to understand what happened, trying to find guidance that wasn't coming. 5 minutes later, they disappeared into the tree line to the west, moving away from the extraction zone. Mara exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. They're gone, she said. Harmon nodded. He didn't ask how she knew. He was past asking questions. The valley floor, he said. How much farther? 300 meters. Mara pointed through the trees. The ridge drops off just ahead. There's a slope, steep but manageable. The helicopter should be waiting at the bottom. Should be. The extraction window closes in 7 minutes. If we're not there, they'll have to leave. 7 minutes. 300 meters of ridge crossing. 2 wounded soldiers. 1 sniper with a bleeding arm. The math was tight, but it was possible. Move, Harmon ordered. They moved. The ridge appeared to the trees like the edge of the world. Beyond it, the slope dropped away into shadow, a 40-degree grade covered in loose snow and exposed rock, treacherous in the best conditions, potentially fatal in their current state. But at the bottom, barely visible through the whiteout, something dark was waiting. Orange panels, Whitfield breathed. I can see orange panels. That's the LZ. It was the helicopter, a UH-60 Blackhawk running dark. Rotors still, crew waiting to cold, had deployed marker panels to guide them in. Standard extraction protocol. A beacon in the storm. 5 minutes. Mara said, checking her watch. We need to be down there in 5 minutes, or they leave without us. Then let's go. Harmon didn't hesitate. He moved to the edge of the ridge, assessed the slope, and started down. The descent was brutal. Coles couldn't walk anymore. His wounded leg had gone completely numb, and Torres and Davis had a half carry, half drag him through the snow. Mitchell was conscious but barely functional, his shoulder wound bleeding through the hasty bandage Davis had applied. The rest of the platoon moved in a ragged line, stumbling over hidden rocks, slipping on ice patches, fighting the mountain every step of the way. Mara stayed at the rear, covering the route they'd taken, watching for pursuit. Her arm was on fire now, the adrenaline wearing off, the pain cutting through her focus, but she maintained her position. That was the job. That was who she was. 3 minutes. They reached the halfway point of the slope. The helicopter was closer now, close enough to see the crew moving inside the cabin, preparing for departure. 2 minutes. Kowski lost his footing and went down hard, sliding 20 meters before he caught himself on a jutting rock. Torres broke formation. To help him up, Davis adjusted his grip on Coles. 1 minute. The helicopter's rotors began to spin. They're preparing for takeoff. Harmon's voice cracked with urgency. Move. Everyone move now. 30 seconds. The platoon covered the last 100 meters in a desperate, stumbling rush. They reached the valley floor just as the rotor wash began to kick up snow, the Black Hawk's engine spooling to full power. Everyone in. The crew chief was screaming over the noise. Get in, get in, get in. Bodies piled into the helicopter. Coles first, lifted by Torres and Davis, then Mitchell, then the rest in a tangle of limbs and gear. Harmon counted heads as they loaded. 10, 11, 12. He looked back toward the slope. Mara was still descending, still moving, still 60 meters from the LZ. We can't wait. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. Enemy forces massing on the ridge. We leave now, or we don't leave at all. Harmon grabbed the crew chief by the shoulder. 30 seconds. Give her 30 seconds. We don't have 30 seconds. Give her 30 seconds or I stay too. The crew chief hesitated. Then he nodded. 20 seconds. Mara was moving faster now, running, sliding, half falling down the slope. Her rifle was secured across her back. Her wounded arm was pressed against her side. 15 seconds. The helicopter began to lift. Just inches, just enough to signal departure. 10 seconds. Mara reached the valley floor. 5 seconds. She dove for the cabin door. Harmon caught her arm, her good arm, and pulled. 0. The helicopter lifted into the gray sky, rotors screaming, cabin door still sliding shut. Below them, the first enemy soldiers appeared on the ridge, their weapons raised toward a target that was already gone. Mara collapsed against the cabin floor, her chest heaving, her arm bleeding through the field dressing. Around her, 11 soldiers stared in silence. The same soldiers who had overlooked her, dismissed her, forgotten she existed. Echo 3, she said to no one in particular. Extraction complete. The flight to the forward operating base took 47 minutes. Nobody spoke for the first 20. There was nothing to say. What they had experienced, what they had survived, existed beyond the reach of ordinary language. Words would come later. Processing would come later. For now, there was only the steady thrum of the rotors and the knowledge that they were still alive. Coles was stabilized by the flight medics. His wound serious but survivable with proper treatment. Mitchell's shoulder was bandaged. The bleeding stopped. The prognosis cautiously optimistic. Torres had mild frostbite in 3 toes. Davis had a sprained ankle from the descent. Everyone else was whole, frozen, exhausted, traumatized, but whole. Mara sat in the corner of the cabin, her back against the bulkhead, her eyes closed. The wound in her arm had been dressed properly now. The medics had insisted, but she hadn't said a word since the extraction. She didn't need to. Her rifle sat across her lap, still loaded, still ready. Harmon watched her from across the cabin. He had questions, 1,000 questions, But he understood that this wasn't the time. Kowalski, on the other hand, had no such restraint. So, his voice was hoarse, stripped raw by cold and fear. The whole time, the whole 9 days, you were just watching. Mara didn't open her eyes. That was the mission. The mission. Kowalski laughed, a harsh, broken sound. You sat there and watched us train. Watched us freeze. Watched us treat you like. He trailed off, like nothing. Yes. And you didn't say anything. I wasn't supposed to. Kowalski was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, smaller. Why did you help us? Mara opened her eyes. She looked at Kowalski, really looked, for the first time since they'd met, and saw the question beneath the question. Why did you save someone who treated you like you didn't exist? Staff Sergeant Marcus Owens, she said slowly. My first partner. My mentor. He died 3 years ago in a training accident that shouldn't have happened. A ricochet. 1 in a million angle on a round that found his throat. The cabin went silent. Even the medics stopped their work. He spent his last 30 seconds making me promise to finish what he started, to be better than him, to be the shooter he always knew I could be. Mara's voice was steady, but something raw moved beneath the surface. He didn't ask me to be perfect. He didn't ask me to be invisible. He asked me to be ready, ready for the moment when concealment became complicity. She looked at Harmon. I watched your platoon die by inches for an hour. I watched the mortar rounds walk closer. I watched Coles bleed and Mitchell freeze, and Kowalski start a break. She paused. I could have acted sooner. I could have revealed myself the moment the radio went down. But my orders were clear. Maintain cover unless tactical conditions became unavoidable. And when did they become unavoidable? Harmon asked quietly. Mara was silent for a long moment. When Kowalski started talking about surrender, when I realized that the men I was supposed to be protecting were about to give up, she looked down at her rifle. That's when I knew the mission had changed. That's when I became something other than an observer. No one spoke. Outside the helicopter, the frozen landscape rolled past, endless white, broken only by the dark shapes of mountains in the distance. Somewhere down there, on a ridge designated Hill 7, 3 bodies were cooling in the snow. An enemy commander, 2 machine gunners, a sniper. They would be found eventually, recovered, identified. But the woman who had killed them would already be gone. The forward operating base appeared through the gray dawn like a promise. The helicopter touched down on the landing pad at 0347 hours. Medical teams were waiting. Stretchers for Coles and Mitchell, blankets for everyone else. The temperature was only -8 here, practically tropical compared to Hill 7. Harmon stepped off the helicopter last, watching his soldiers move toward the warmth and light of the base buildings. They walked like men who couldn't quite believe they were still vertical. Some of them were crying. Some of them were laughing. Most were doing both. He looked back toward the cabin. Mara was still there, still sitting with her back against the bulkhead, still holding her rifle. Echo 3. Harmon's voice was quiet. We're down. I know. She didn't move. The medics won't look at your arm. I'll find them later. Harmon hesitated. There were protocols for this. Debriefs, reports, chains of command. But protocols felt inadequate right now. Insufficient. Calloway. He used her real name deliberately. What you did up there was classified. Her voice was flat. Everything that happened on Hill 7 stays there. You'll file your after-action report with the details you're cleared to include. My designation will appear as Echo 3 and nothing else. My file will be flagged at Level 5 clearance restriction. Anyone who asks questions will be told there are no answers. That's not what I was going to say. Mara finally looked at him. Her eyes were tired, more tired than any 24-year-old's eyes should ever be. Then what were you going to say? Harmon took a breath. I was going to say thank you, not as your commanding officer, not as a representative of the United States military, just as a man who gets to go home because you decided that concealment wasn't worth 12 lives. The silence stretched. Then, slowly, Mara nodded. You're welcome, Sergeant. She disappeared before dawn. Harmon had gone to the medical bay to check on his soldiers, fully intending to find Calloway afterward. When he returned to the landing pad, the helicopter was empty. Her bunk, the same bunk she'd occupied for 9 days as a quiet, overlook support specialist, had been stripped clean. Her gear was gone. Her personnel file had been flagged as transferred with no destination listed. Private First Class Mara Calloway no longer existed. In her place, there was only a designation, Echo 3, and a file that required clearance, levels most soldiers would never achieve. Harmon filed his after-action report 4 days later. It was comprehensive, detailed, exactly what the Army expected from a seasoned NCO. It described the enemy positions, the tactical situation, the decisions made under pressure. It mentioned an attached specialist who demonstrated unexpected capabilities during the engagement. It did not mention her name, but there was a section at the end, Section 7, that Harmon sealed personally. Inside, written in his own hand, was a complete account of everything that had happened on Hill 7. Every shot, every calculation, every impossible decision made by a woman who had been invisible until the moment she became the most important person on that frozen ridgeline. He would carry that section with him from posting to posting for the rest of his career, not to revisit it, not to share it, just because some things needed to be kept. Specialist Kowalski returned to his unit 2 weeks after Hill 7. He was different. Everyone noticed it, but no one could quite articulate how. He was quieter, maybe more thoughtful, less likely to fill silence with noise. He carried 3 spent brass casings in his left breast pocket. He never explained where they came from. He never talked about Hill 7 in any detail. But when new soldiers arrived, when the confident ones walked in thinking they had everyone figured out, Kowalski would watch them with an expression that nobody could quite read. He never judged anyone quickly anymore. He never dismissed anyone at first glance. Some lessons cost too much to forget. Whitfield told the story once. Just once. It was 2 months later, at a forward base in another country. The soldiers who hadn't been there. He started at the beginning, the cold, the pinned-down platoon, the destroyed radio, and worked his way through the middle. But when he reached the end, he stopped. We were all watching the slope for an hour, he said, shaking his head. All of us. And we didn't see any of it. He never finished the story. He didn't know how. Private First Class Mara Calloway never existed. That's what the official record said. That's what the clearance restrictions ensured. The woman who had walked into Harmon's platoon 9 days before Hill 7, who had sat quietly at the edge of every formation, who had been dismissed and overlooked and forgotten. She had been erased as completely as if she had never been born. But somewhere out there, in a file that only a handful of people would ever see, a designation remained, Echo 3, and somewhere, in the memory of 12 soldiers who had been given the gift of additional years, a lesson remained too, the quiet one, the overlooked one, the one everyone wrote off. Sometimes, that was the one who saved everything. Mara's story shows us that true strength isn't always loud, that the most capable among us sometimes hide in plain sight. If this kept you engaged, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. Tell me, if you were in Mara's position, would you have waited as long as she did, or would you have revealed yourself sooner? Subscribe if you haven't already. More stories like this are coming. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next one. The sun rose over the forward operating base on the morning after Hill 7. It painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, warming the frozen edges of the world just enough to remind everyone that spring would come eventually, that the cold wouldn't last forever, that even the longest winters had to end. Sergeant First Class Derek Harmon stood at the edge of the base, watching the sun rise. He had been awake for 43 hours. His body was screaming for sleep. His mind was still processing everything that had happened, but he stayed there anyway, watching the light spread across the mountains. Somewhere out there, on a frozen ridge designated Hill 7, 3 spent casings lay buried in the snow. Evidence of shots that shouldn't have been possible. Evidence of a woman who had been invisible until the moment she became everything. Harmon touched the sealed envelope in his jacket pocket. Section 7. The truth that would never be officially acknowledged. He watched the sunrise for another 5 minutes. Then he turned and walked toward the barracks, toward sleep, toward the rest of his career. Some stories ended with medals and parades. This one ended with a sealed envelope and a sunrise. And somehow, that felt exactly right.